Moving on now to the biggest winners and losers at the wide receiver position. There was 6 wide receivers in the first 15 picks off round 1. There was no wide receivers taken then to the start of the second round, but we had Drake London, Garrett Wilson, Jameson Williams, Treylon Burks, Chris Olave, and then Jahan Dodson. Who is the biggest winner from those first round picks? I think we can skip the loser portion. It probably is Jahan Dodson.
Yeah, I think Jahan, I mean, the biggest winner from the first round guys, I mean, I think it's Burks. Because like compared to what we knew going into draft day for, and then what we now know, like, I mean, the thing, like, okay, like with David Bell, right? We all say Jarvis Landry, but we really want to say Keenan Allen. With Treylon Burks, it's like we kind of all danced around not saying AJ Brown. And now we can kind of be like, well, he's going to be the AJ Brown of that team. And, it's a similar prospect profile compared to AJ Brown. Becoming AJ Brown with that prospect profile is still incredibly unlikely. Like even for AJ Brown to become AJ Brown wasn't like the likeliest outcome. But you've got a guy who's a big wide receiver, played in the slot, highly efficient at everything he did, and carried his team's offense. And now you've got the Titans saying like, yep, we know what to do with that. So I'm pretty interested. That the thing with a guy like Treylon Burks that would actually worry me is if he went to a team that was like, he's our Debo, because that feels like you're so much more reliant on, schemed stuff and the coach actually being sharp. A lot of these coaches think they're sharp. They're not as sharp as they think. So this system, the play action, the system's designed to like create create him, but Yak from like the intermediate and deep areas of the field, not just like trying to throw him screens and stuff. So obviously the production is not going to be AJ Brown-esque and the efficiency won't be on that level. But I mean, we weren't sure. There was stuff of like, oh, he might fall out of the first round. He might be a second round pick. The FUD on Treylon Burks was like really at a peak on Twitter. I mean, and people were acting like he was just already bust or something. So to get him to the Titans, replacing AJ Brown in the middle of the first was pretty sweet. And then I think Drake London's a pretty big winner in a similar way, where he's got a chance to just like eat targets. And like I like Garrett Wilson better as a prospect, but I think I'll ultimately have Drake London ranked ahead because it's like hard to see, Drake London not having a pretty decent rookie year now.
You mentioned Garrett Wilson in there, and he was kind of the third guy in our rookie rankings summit that there was a little bit of controversy with, because most of us really had this tier of Hall, London, and Burks. And the question is London or Burks at 2. And then for reasons you've mentioned with Hall, I mean, if you were set at running back and couldn't trade down or just believed one of those guys, obviously you could take them at the 101. Is Wilson still in that group? Travis May, who obviously is our most immersed college football analyst, still felt that he was, and kind of like you're saying, there were a lot of people, including Dave Cabin, who moved him down a little bit post-draft, but felt like Wilson was the number 2 guy coming in.
Yeah,
overall, I mean, it's number one wide receiver.
Number 1 wide receiver. Okay. Yeah, I think Ben Gretsch had him as his number 1 wide receiver. He put in a stealing signals article, and I think that's like I totally get the Garrett Wilson wide receiver 1 argument. I had Burks 1 and Wilson 2. Post draft, it feels harder because, like, it's a somewhat crowded receiving depth chart. Corey Davis they're going to cut him after the year. Like his contract almost demands that they cut him after the year, but it makes it harder for Wilson to hit the ground running as a rookie. Elijah Moore can obviously play. And then Zach Wilson, we're not sure if he's good. So like all the landing spot stuff, definitely concerning, but like we've just seen time and time again, if the guy is awesome, it'll shine through and it will change things. Like Zach Wilson, we might end up thinking like, oh, he's not that bad because Garrett Wilson's a superstar. Like that's the wide receivers impact offenses. That's why, I like drafting them high, and I don't like drafting running backs that high, because like you can actually see the offense change if the guy's good enough. I think Garrett Wilson has a chance to be that good. I mean, he checks like every box. He was productive. Like with the Alabama guys over the last few years, we're making a lot of excuses for them. It's like, well, yeah, Devonta Smith like never really did what we were looking for, but he's playing with all these other guys and stuff. He finally does it as a senior, but the underclassmen stuff's disappointing. Garrett Wilson broke out. Garrett Wilson has like pretty solid career numbers. He was super efficient, and he's declaring early, and he goes to the 10th pick in the draft. Like he's got everything we're looking for. His size isn't quite what we want, but outside of that, and even though he's small, he does have elite speed. So it's not like, I'm not worried about him translating. It's more like, can he be, is he more than like a Brandon Cooks type, or can he actually be like a superstar? So I think that's the main question with him. And then it's like, now it's like Brandon Cooks with Zach Wilson. So it's not as fun. But man, I mean, like in a draft, like if I had to only take one guy, like I was in one dynasty league and I got a chance between Drake London and Garrett Wilson, I think I'd take Garrett Wilson. Like if it was my one team and I'm just making one bet, I want to bet on Garrett Wilson because I think the talent level there, I just feel more comfortable betting on him.
That's interesting. I like that. I've been having a hard time because I want to move Jameson Williams up into that group or ahead of Wilson. Now he's going to have that lion on his helmet. And I went through this really dark patch, Pat, where the Lions had Calvin Johnson, and they saw fit to, instead of do whatever it took to pull him back from retirement, they're like, we'll just go with Golden Tate and Marvin Jones. And I could not have been more completely out on that. Like, I just hate the Lions now. But now we're back, right? You've got Williams, you've got Chark, you've got Amon-Ra St. Brown, you have TJ Hawkins and DeAndre Swift. Once they get that quarterback in there, I don't know. It sounded to me like you cannot stay in front of Williams, and he's going to take it to the house every time. So, but speaking of the most exciting receiver in the NFL draft, obviously we have Skye Moore. He goes to the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs make that kind of gutsy decision to move down, and some teams take some iffy guys in front of him. So he goes below Wandale, Thornton, Pickens, Mechie, Pierce, but he does go to Kansas City, and we know that they were connected to him. Again, I think they had to have been ecstatic. Is this landing spot as good as it appears on the surface? You had joked with us on the stream that if you had the 104, you were going to sit tight and take him there. Larry Andrews actually selected him at 104 in one of our rookie mocks for our rankings summit. We had to give Blair a hard time, but only in the case that we were all jealous that we hadn't done it. Where do you expect him to sort of settle and see a target for you there?
I think he'll settle after where I have him ranked, because I'm going to have him ranked at the 106. So not at the 104, because at the 104 now we're talking about, I mean, we might be talking about Burks. Like you might sit at the 104 and get Burks, because I'm seeing Kenneth Walker
still seeing him at
102.
6.
I mean, okay, well, yeah. So at 104 is, we don't even need to think about more at the moment, but and I would take
have
Jameson
more
Williams.
of a Burks if you want. I mean, just
I don't have more of a Burks. Don't bait me, Shawn. No, and I would also take Jameson Williams over him, because I think everything you're saying about just how high the ceiling is with him, with Williams, makes a ton of sense, and they're going to get a quarterback who's not Jared Goff pretty soon. So, but Skye Moore, it's really like at this point, what he's missing is like he wasn't a first round pick, and he's not like that great as a deep threat. He's really good in the intermediate area. He's not like a shallow guy in terms of, the types of routes he gets open on and stuff. But I don't know if he's going to ultimately add that deep threat element, which is what he needs to become like a true fantasy star. That's where you get to like Stephon Diggs, right? You can't. Otherwise, I know your concern is that like am I drafting Golden Tate with a mid first? And it does feel maybe it's Jeremy Maclin, which, good fit for that Andy Reid system. And I don't know, maybe peak Maclin with Patrick Mahomes would have been pretty awesome. So I think it probably is more that. Like, I think he probably is kind of more of the intermediate guy who can occasionally win deep, but that's not going to be his calling card, rather than, someone who adds that element to his game, even though he's pretty fast, but to project that feels a little much. But, if he's already off the bat really strong in the intermediate area and is going to be playing on the outside, at least for some of his snaps, because Juju Smith-Schuster is not going to just seed all the slot snaps. So we're getting Skye Moore playing some on the outside. With Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, that's like super exciting. We also have Marcus Valdis Scantling, who's going to be more than capable of stretching the defense and playing, that deep threat role. So, it kind of sets up perfectly for Skye Moore, because Juju, let's face it, has stunk the last couple years. So if you have a guy who owns the slot but doesn't earn targets at a super high rate, and when he does earn targets, it's like an 8 out of 5. And then we've got Marcus Valdis Scantling, who his 8 out's like 17. It's too deep to consistently earn targets. Skye Moore just feasting in the intermediate area, the sweet 8 out of around 11, just we could be talking about a 24-25% target share here. I'm starting to hype myself up.
He's getting excited.
Yeah. I don't know. We're not really missing much with Moore. He just seems like. The other thing about the wide receiver analysis is that I don't know we're that great at identifying ceiling. It's more like we're good at figuring out who's going to be good, and then the ceiling can always surprise you. And the Justin Jefferson stuff, it just really sticks with me. This is at Garrett Wilson. One of the reasons I'm insisting that I stay high on Garrett Wilson is that it's guy who checks all the boxes and then gets draft capital can be a superstar. We don't also then need to go, well, he played in the slot, and is that gonna? It's no, Justin Jefferson checked every single box, goes in the first round, and is a star. So Skye Moore, didn't go in the first round, goes in the second round, gets the great landing spot, has the size, actually has more of the size than Garrett Wilson, to where you could actually see him becoming a fantasy wide receiver 1. Probably more of a wide receiver 2 type, but yeah, I want to be above market, and I have him at the 106. I think he'll probably be more in that late first range in Superflex. So hopefully I'll have a lot of them.
Yeah, you mentioned the ceiling, and kind of like you were saying with Jarvis Landry, Keenan Allen on the comps for David Bell. Blair was frustrating as he was editing our post-draft reaction for Moore. And he's like, I don't want to see these Golden Tate comps. It's Stephon Diggs. It's got to be Diggs, right? And
I don't even think Diggs is it's Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown is the don't say it comp. The don't you dare even say it comp is Antonio Brown.
So you're still going to claim that Antonio Brown is better than Stephon Diggs?
Wow. From a fantasy perspective, I don't know. We don't need to get in a talent debate here, but from a fantasy perspective, I think he's had a stronger career.
Well, that's why, and I think both in terms of White from the NBC show and Moore from Chip Chasing on Thursday, I nailed both of those guys for us, got them to the team. Well, White to the draft Kepler, but the highlight comment, I'm watching and I'm like, I know that this is Pat's favorite guy ever, and he looks good, but I want to see, Stephon Diggs there, right?
Right.
You're taking Stephon Diggs against that level of competition. I'm just thinking 70-yard touchdown with 5 missed tackles forced on every play.
Yeah.
And maybe it wasn't quite that, but no, he looks very good. I'm very, very excited. Speaking of a couple of guys,
JJ Zachariason has compared him to DJ Moore, and I actually think that's a really, really good comp. Because he even has that kind of that stockiness to him. I think that's the real, the Stephon Diggs and Antonio Brown stuff. I think it's too much. I don't think that's who he is, because I don't think he's going to have that deep threat element, as I was saying. But Moore can be used as a deep threat at times, but he's better, as we saw, they kind of had him in the deep threat role 2 years ago and comes back more to the intermediate role and the yards after catch stuff, that's where he's best. And I think Skye Moore will be the same, where, if he's getting used mostly on intermediate targets and shallow targets with some deep stuff sprinkled in, he can be awesome, and he can have some yards after the catch as well.
He should just be wide open. I mean, you described their offense perfectly, what they need to do. On top of that, him there in the intermediate. I mean, Pat, he could lead NFL wide receivers in first downs as a rookie. Speaking of a couple guys who probably can't, we got Thornton and Pierce. Are these guys winners because they're selected at solid points in round 2? I mean, we're talking about just very solidly here in round 2. Or are they losers because of underwhelming QB play? Or, Pat, are they just losers because of their own resumes?
I think the resume. I mean, Pierce, I think, is a bit of a loser, not because of his own resume purely. Like, Pierce is the type of guy. I was doing some comp stuff and pulling in guys. One thing that's interesting is like you kind of pull in comps, and some guys, like, there really aren't that many. And Pierce was like, he comped to like every wide receiver ever, because he's just like an NFL wide receiver who gets drafted. Like, so he's not a special player, but he's athletic. He's got good size, and he's a deep threat. And that's an archetype that I think is worth betting on, particularly when it's not expensive in rookie drafts, because occasionally those guys will really surprise you. Most of the time, they're kind of like, it's Marcus Valdis Scantling or something like that. But occasionally you get a Terry McLaurin or a DJ Shark or something. And I think, it's worth kind of firing at that profile. Thornton is like, I mean, sort of the same profile. Certainly, he's even faster, but he's smaller. He's like 181. And I don't know. I'm having a hard time getting really excited about him on any level. It's kind of like in my rankings, I've just sort of like, every time I see him, I'm like, I can probably get another running back or two above him.
Finishing up with a couple of wide receivers, I think got very interesting landing spots, landing with the Buffalo Bills and the Green Bay Packers, and that is Khalil Shakir and Romeo Doubs. And I think they're both obviously an explosive offenses, which I think benefits them bothly. But do you have a preference for either of those? And are you excited about either of them in 2022?
I'm not, and I wish I was. I liked Shakir a lot as a prospect. Well, I shouldn't say a lot, but he was one of those guys that when we were starting things, I was thinking would be like a second round guy who I would get to fade. And then I was like, oh, maybe he's a third round guy that I get to draft cheaply. But now, he went in the 4th or 5th round. Those day 3 guys, they just, you really have to be a special player, I think, to emerge from day 3. And even when it happens, Gabe Davis, who wasn't like a special prospect, but I think a better prospect than either of these guys. And he was an early declare and, decently productive. It took a few years, and it took the team being like, it's not going to happen. Like they were like, Emmanuel Sanders is better than you, dude. Like he had to prove he was better than, now retired Emmanuel Sanders. So it's just such a difficult path. I do have a hard time getting excited about either guy. I have them right next to each other. I think at this point, the answer is probably Doubs, because he gets to play with Aaron Rodgers and there's opportunity. And so, he doesn't necessarily have to get worried about, we don't have to be as worried about him getting buried by a veteran, but could be the type of thing where he just instantly disappears, It
does feel that way. And even as a Packers fan with my, Green Bay hat on, it feels like that could be the case. So we'll see what happens over the coming months. Hopefully we'll get some good reports about these guys when it comes to training camp and things like that.